joke that I like to refer to myself as the chopper chick. So to say that I am usually the one who goes up in the helicopter hurricane season to determine what it looks like below as a storm is approaching. And usually here at the Miami Herald, when we do have a storm, especially when it's coming into South Florida, what we often do is we send up a helicopter to just try to get a sense of what it's looking like below. For instance, I recalled a couple of years ago, I went to the Bahamas. I mean, the storm had just covered the Bahamas in water, and it was headed our way, and I was in a helicopter headed to the Bahamas. And when we arrived in the Bahamas, we couldn't even land because there was water everywhere. So I personally have gone from that to now being a foreign correspondent and mostly responsible for Haiti, although I do cover the English-speaking Caribbean as well. But we know that Haiti is just prone to disasters, and so every year during hurricane season, it's going to get hit by a storm. So at the beginning of hurricane season, my bags are packed. I'm driving around in my car with a suitcase as well as with my passport. And the suitcase is something small that I can usually carry as a carry-on because you never know the situation that you're going to be in. For instance, a couple of years ago when I had to fly to Jamaica after Hurricane Ivan, and then an editor called from the Miami Herald and says, I need you to get to the Cayman Islands because the Cayman Islands has just been smashed. And I had to figure out how to get from Jamaica to the Cayman Islands, and thank goodness all I had was this one bag to carry. So first and foremost, as journalists, I always like to tell them you have to travel light, but you also have to travel with the essentials. As far as the disasters that I personally have covered, I've covered hurricanes. I've also covered the earthquake in Haiti. I was not there the day that the earthquake hit, but I did arrive the next day. I was on one of the first planes that arrived, on the runway in Port-au-Prince before noon. And I was there subsequently for the next 18 months covering, the aftermath of that disaster. So I guess you can call me a veteran in terms of these disasters, but you never get used to it, and no one disaster is the same. I mean, as we recently saw here with Sandy, in Haiti, we have at least 54 dead last count. That number could very well grow because there were also people who were missing. And what made this storm different from Tropical Storm Isaac, which I also covered because I was in the country at the end of August when that storm came through, is that where Isaac was more of a wind, this was a lot of rain. And so here we are in Haiti when the storm is coming, and this is a country that really can't sustain a lot of rain. And we had 4 consecutive days of rain in areas that are prone to floods. And what you're seeing in some of these pictures, for instance, is a town called Leogan, where these are literally people's front yards, where rivers overran their banks. And between the river and the rainfall that was coming in, it just took over people's homes. And you have a country that is already battling a cholera epidemic, so that was also adding to the situation. Right here is a main road that leads to the southern corridor of the country. Myself and my colleague, Carl Schutz, who's a photographer who took these pictures, we were trying to see as far south as we could get because that was the hardest hit of the area. But because we had left late, we had to decide very early on how far we're going to go. And as we were traveling on this road, what we noticed were that topsoil was coming off of the mountains. Cars were actually getting stalled in standing water. And so at some point we need to make the decision because we need to turn back. First and foremost, I tell every journalist, you have to be safe. If you are not safe, if you are not in a position where you can file, you really are of no use. By the time you can tell that story, well, we've already moved on to the next big story or, unfortunately, the next big disaster. So whenever you're covering one of these issues, you have to think about what is it that I can get, what are the photos that can relay the impact, and knowing that you're not going to be able to get everything, For instance, in the situation of Haiti, we knew that some of the areas that were hardest hit were areas that we just aren't going to be able to get to because roads have been cut off and there's an access problem. And so we had to just go as far as we could go reasonably within a reasonable time, and then we turned back around and head back toward the capital. The next day, I was also able to go into a helicopter with the Prime Minister. I had sent him a text message, the day before, and I said, hey, by the way, are you going to do a chopper flight? Are you going to go into a helicopter? Because if you are, I would really like to go with you. Again, knowing that there would be a need for a story the next day and being unable to get to some of those hardest hit areas, what is the best way to continue to keep this story in the news and to talk about the impact as the death tolls continue to goes up or additional information comes in. And so he was able to get me a seat on the chopper, and I went on that chopper with him. And then we were able to get an aerial view of the disaster. And again, nothing beats ground, of course, but at least when you see the aerial, you get an opportunity to really see how widespread the devastation is. Again, these stories, what makes these stories are people. They're individual stories. Again, this particular town, Grenguave, this photo that you're looking at, this is a woman who told me about having to run in the middle of the night, with her kids. And, when you're in a situation like that, okay, so how do you prove that her story is true? I mean, what you have to do is just go back to shoestring reporting, where can you take me to the house? Where did this happen? And you continue to ask some of the same questions again to see if the story changes every time they tell you, where you also talk to other neighbors. Because oftentimes when you come in, they assume that you're there from an international aid agency. Are you there?
Mhm.
Yeah, they assume that you're there from an international aid agency or you're there to provide assistance. And so oftentimes, too, sometimes people tell you what they think you want to hear. And so what you have to do with your reporting is you also have to talk to the people who are on the ground. So you've got the real people with their real stories, but how do you match your stories with the reality and what's happened? In the case of a foreign country, you talk to the international aid organizations, you talk to the government. In the case of the United States, you find out who's in charge of disaster. Is it, you talk to the Red Cross. What did you see? Where did you go? You talk to Emergency Operations Center. If it's involving a river or a dam, you ask questions about, when was the last time this was maintained? Is there a record that you can provide or assist us with this? Again, often, in a third world country, you don't get the luxury of records, of getting those additional information. And it really is about going back to the basics in terms of being a reporter and asking the same questions over and over and over again and asking people, well, who else was involved in this project? Who else can tell me about this project? And finding those individuals that can help you put together a complete picture, of the story. And what I've often found is that in these situations, because the international community donors, especially that they provide funding, they often do have records of either, money that was provided to the budget or things that went before Congress, so that is very helpful. So what I like to say to reporters is that, it's always about, can you show me the papers, can you show me the documents, but you also have to get out and you have to do the reporting. You have to talk to as many people as you can in a reasonable time frame, because you do have deadlines, but you talk to the people, that are in that community that has been affected. You ask them about previous rainfall, previous things that may have happened. Was there a problem? Were there warnings? Did anybody raise any questions? And then you have to retrace their steps. And I think that allows for a larger picture. But at the end of the day, also remember that, it's a human tale that gets people into this story, that allows them to basically identify, with the disaster, that this could have been them, that they, as a mother, they identify with a mother's story, or, with a tragedy that has hit a particular family. And so just being able to approach those people and get them to tell you about their experience will help carry that story.